Hi, I'm Nate Bronner with the Virginia Cooperative Extension and the Master Gardener Program. I'd like to welcome you back to my garden. Raised beds are a great way that you can up your gardening game and make things a lot easier for you in your garden. Raised beds are a natural thing to turn to if you have limited space around your house or your apartment or your condo or a townhome, and you don't have that much a large yard where you can garden. But it goes beyond that. Number one, it makes things more accessible. If you have a child, raised beds help bring that soil up to a level that's a little bit closer to them. It also shows them an area that they don't want to step inside and they can kneel down outside and reach in. For older adults or adults with mobility problems, raised beds are a great way that you can help keep them from having to lean over quite so far and be able to bring that garden up to their level, or at least a little bit closer to their level. Raised beds can also be a really good way to keep things tidier in your yard. They keep things in a defined space, so it doesn't roam outside of the raised bed. Now, things are still going to grow quite a bit, and those plants are going to grow big and bushy, but at least for the start and the foundation of them, they'll stay within that raised bed. It also helps you give a little bit more control over your garden, about where things are going and what it's going to be looking like in the end. And it helps you control the soil. Now, for any garden that you have, the soil that you have in your garden is like the foundation of your house. If you get that part right, most everything else in your garden is going to be easy to work with after that. But if you get the soil wrong up front, if you have the wrong kind of soil, then you're going to be fighting against that the whole time, and your garden isn't going to be doing quite as well. If you garden in the soil that's just outside your house or or wherever you live, and you're gardening in the ground, you're taking whatever is left over there. Now, that soil might be really good, but it also might not be, and you don't know unless you test that soil, find out what is there and what you might need to be adding to that. Sometimes getting that mixture right, it takes quite a bit of work. With raised beds, you can take that step out of the equation. You can control the soil that you put into your raised beds. Now, you can put in soil just from your yard, but then you're back in square one. What I prefer to go with more ideal soil. Now, the more ideal soil will have everything in it that those plants need to grow. It'll have organic matter for them. It'll have some parts of the soil that'll hold on to that moisture when it gets rain or when you water it, and then slowly release that to the roots over a hot summer day. And it'll also keep that soil nice and airy. So it'll keep air pockets in that soil that the roots need to push through that soil and to establish themselves. The roots are critical to a plant. If you don't have a strong root structure, then the plant's not going to do very well in your garden. And a good way to have a good root structure is to make sure that soil doesn't get very compact. A great way that you can make sure that you have the ideal soil in your garden is to use a simple mix. I talk about equal parts of compost, peat moss, and vermiculite. Now, compost you can get from the dump or you can get from garden centers. It's rich organic material that provides the basics that those plants are going to need to grow. But if you only had compost, that soil could get too compacted. So you need some other things too. One of them is peat moss. Peat moss can be bought in large bags like this. It's 3 cubic feet. And peat moss comes from bogs. Most of ours that we have here comes from Canada, and it is very light and airy until it gets wet. And when it gets wet, it'll swell up in size. Now, you can use cocoa fibers if you don't want to use peat moss, and there are a couple of other peat moss substitutes, but you need something that's going to be able to hold on to, swell up, and expand like a sponge when water gets into it, and then slowly release it to the plants. The other substance that you need is vermiculite. Vermiculite helps you keep those air spaces between the plants. It's a small crushed rock that's incredibly light. Big bag like that, that's 4 cubic feet. You can get that at most specialty garden centers, and sometimes they might have to order it for you, so talk to the clerk there. But this holds the air spaces and keeps that soil nice and airy so those roots can push through it. It keeps your soil uncompacted. Now the soil in my beds here, I never step into it, so it never gets trampled like the soil in the grass or out in the forest does, and it makes it a lot better for the plants to grow in. Now you can see my beds right here. My beds are about 4 feet wide, and they're about 12 inches tall. I use 12 inches because most plants need about 6 inches of soil to grow in, and that's as much as their roots will use. But if I made all of my beds only 6 inches tall, I'd have to fill the soil all the way up to the top to give those roots enough room. So I make them 12 inches. And what that also allows me to do is grow the other plants that need a little bit more room. Plants like carrots that need a little bit more room in the soil so they can grow their entire root structure. I can grow those in these beds as well. I'm a huge fan of using 12 inches as a height for your raised beds. The other thing that's important is you can make your beds as long as you need to make them, but you don't want to make them wider than 4 feet. Why? Because I can comfortably reach about 2 feet into my garden and harvest things without stepping in there. If I make it wider than 4 feet, then I can't reach that far and it increases the temptation for me to step into the garden. Similarly, if I have something on the other side of my garden, like a fence, so I can't get over onto that side, I want to make it a little bit narrower than 4 feet so I can comfortably reach in. What you use to make your raised beds is really up to you. You can use scrap lumber that you have around the house, that you have and that's left over. The big thing that you want to make sure there is that it is not treated lumber from prior to the year 2001. Prior to the year 2001, they used arsenic in pressure treating the lumber, and that's not really safe to use in a food when you're growing food. Since that time, they use a different type of salt that doesn't use arsenic, and pressure treated lumber now is quite safe for you to use in your garden and with flowers, with vegetables, anything that you want. Virginia Tech has done the research on that, and there's no problem with you using pressure-treated lumber now. For these beds here, I used lumber that was 2 inches by 12 inches, and I reinforced the each corner with a 2x2 that I set down there, and I screwed the lumber to that. That helps reinforce the corners and makes it a lot easier. There are some other options for building your garden, and I'd like to take you to see some of those. Let's go over here. Beds like this one here are used for pollinator gardens. Reminds you that raised beds are not just for vegetables, they can be used for flowers as well. For this bed here, I have a number of bulbs like daffodils here that are growing up and grow up in the spring. As they fade, I have other plants that are growing up here, like agastacia, that will grow up and serve as a food source for pollinators as they move through. Further back, I have things like catnip and dill and other things that pollinators absolutely love. But I build these beds using landscape timbers. Now, landscape timbers are flat on 2 sides, you can see right here, and then rounded on the other 2 sides. They come in lengths of 8 feet long, and they're about 3 inches high like this. So I stack 4 of these here to make this up to 12 inches tall. You can't see the bottom one because it's sunken down a little bit. But I stack them Lincoln log style, as you can see right here, so they overlap. Then I take a 1/2-inch drill bit and I drill a hole down through all of the layers, and I take a 2-foot section of rebar that's 3/8 of an inch in diameter, and I use a sledgehammer to pound it down through here. I do that on each of the corners and halfway along each side. So for an example, for a 4-foot by 4-foot raised bed garden, I would need 8 pieces of rebar to take care of that. If I make it especially long, like this bed here is 16 feet long, I would have to add a couple extra as I go down the length to make sure that the let the boards stay together and lined up. And it'll stay here for years and years. This pressure treated wood right here is safe to use in both flower gardens and in vegetable gardens. It makes it really easy. This isn't the only thing that you can do with it though. You can use the landscape timbers to make other designs as well, as opposed to only squares or rectangles. Here's a good example that a beekeeper did with hers to make hexagons with it. All it takes is cutting the wood at different angles, in this case at a 60-degree rather than 90-degree angle, and you can lay the logs together in the same way and build your bed up that way. Remember that you might lose, as everything settles down in, the bottom layer of the logs into the soil as things settle like they do in our area. But this gives you a really nice design for your garden where you can have one next to another and have your garden nicely laid out with a distinctive design. Raised beds don't have to be plain. You can do whatever you want with them. So there you have it. Quick and easy, the basics on gardening in raised beds. It really will make your job as a gardener quite a bit easier. One other thing to note though, we talked a lot about raised beds, but we didn't talk a lot about how much room to leave yourself in between the raised beds. When you're planning them out, make sure you leave yourself walking room in between them of at least 2 feet. Sometimes 2.5 or 3 feet is better. You might think that's wasted space, but remember, those plants that you plant when they're really little are going to grow and really bush out. Sometimes they might even spill out of the confines of those raised beds, and it's going to become more and more difficult for you to make your way through the garden in midsummer. You'll be really glad that you left yourself the room to move through those raised beds. If you'd like to learn more about this, there's plenty of information on the Virginia Tech website, and I'll give you some examples of that at the end of this video. I'd also recommend the book Square Foot Gardening by Mil Bartholomew. You can get it at any bookstore or online bookseller, and it is a fantastic resource for you starting your journey with planting raised beds. If you have any questions or you'd like to see other information, please leave comments below, and thanks for coming back to my garden.